All right, we are recording. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. So we have Laura Opstedal here. She's going to be talking to us a little bit about objective testing and ACL, and then we're going to spiral a little bit later on into some hop testing and see what she likes, what she doesn't like. But I don't want to spoil the surprise because she may have changed my mind with some of this stuff, and we got some good papers too. So with that, Laura, do you want to briefly introduce yourself? We kind of take a policy where, people should know you because you're so famous. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on intro on an intro, but tell us just briefly where you are and kind of what your typical practice is.
I'm in Bozeman, Montana. I opened my own practice 2 years ago. Yay, COVID. And I, um, a little late in my career, I would say, as far as opening my own practice, but I practiced most of my career actually in Washington State. So I'm from Tacoma and then moved here in 2013. I worked actually at a Pops clinic, don't at me. And from there, I decided I wanted to have my own practice for multiple reasons. And selfishly, part of it was I wanted cool toys to use in my practice because I felt really bogged down with an inability to objectively look at things. And my, I guess, coworkers, not necessarily my coworkers, but I didn't really see eye to eye with a lot of things as far as, it's going to take up too much room to have a nice kinetic machine, or it's too expensive or whatnot. But with ACLs in particular, the re-injury rates being super high and really no change over the last 20 years. Like, what are we doing? Um,
What are we
35%.
doing? What are we doing,
I
Laura?
don't know what we're doing. I think we're missing the boat here. I just felt like I wasn't doing a very good service to my patients or due diligence or whatever you want to say. I did not feel confident in clearing people back to sport. And, I became a little obsessed with having an isokinetic machine first and foremost, probably thanks to Eric Mira. And then it just kind of grew from there. So in my practice, if you haven't seen it online, it's it's geared really for anybody, but I think it has some of the components in it to help me be a better practitioner, um, have transparency in what I'm doing, measure what I'm doing, and make better decisions overall for my athletes and my patients as a whole.
Yeah, well, because it's not just for your athletes, right? Like I'm assuming it's not cohort or demographic specific. But before we get into that stuff, I mean, the obvious question here is clear. I mean, so far, obviously, objective testing is a big priority and a cornerstone for you and your practice. So, if you're opening a new practice, and you and I have talked offline, and that people ask you this question all the time. So, what do you need in your clinic? I mean, isokinetics are expensive. That's clearly a limitation. But what if you could kind of give me some buckets here? What's need to have? What's nice to have, and then what should be a wish list for somebody that's, let's say, starting their clinic and they too want to kind of adopt this objective testing paradigm that we've somewhat I think as a profession adopted very strongly over the last few years.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see people come on board as far as using dynamometry for strength testing, and I blame that or credit that to Scott. Um, that's multiple questions like, what do you have? What is the best device to use? So I would say at the very least, if you really want to be critical of your rehab or even have the transparency with your patients, you need something to measure.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know else how to say that. It's if you look at just a handheld Mark 10, it's $900. That's such a small amount when you're opening a big practice and you're spending money on, high-low tables, which I don't have, or um, ultrasound machines or uh,
Right.
dry needling equipment. I don't know. It's not that much money.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, does it need to be based on? I mean, I think most of us here, when we think of dynamometry, right, we think of the handheld dynamometer, right? The little, again, I don't want to use names because there's obviously different models and things out there, but there are a few different models that are out there, and then you have the standard, right, the grip strength dynamometer as well. Is
Mhm.
that the kind of stuff you're talking about? I mean, what makes this Mark 10 or these other devices worth that extra money? Because you can get them cheaper, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've used the one that you're talking about, and
Yeah.
uh, I think it needs to have a load capacity to it. The first one that I had, I think the max on it was probably 200 pounds or 250 pounds, and I broke it on my last day on purpose. I had this D1 collegiate football player, and I had it in a inline setup on a plinth, and we were doing his kind of final strength test there, and I knew he was going to blow it, and it was hilarious. So he kicked it so hard that it came apart and it hit the wall and created a big dent in the drywall. Um, so
Was that a pass? Did you give him a pass for that?
no, because
No, unknown. Yeah.
yeah, unknown. I tested them later when I opened my clinic, but um, I think you need to consider the capabilities for all people, and I think the Mark 10 goes up to 500 foot-pounds, doesn't it, Scott?
Hmm.
Somewhere up there.
Yep.
I actually just
Which
bought one.
is, did you? Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, if
it goes up to 500 pounds. Foot pounds
pounds.
would be the torque measure. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's 500, and then it's a 1,000 pound before failure limit.
so it's not gonna
Which
be
is,
hard.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's part of the conversation too, right? Is if you're selecting devices, what do you look for in a device, specifically in this ACL population? I mean, what are primarily you testing that you need objective data for?
Quads, hamstrings. I mean, you can throw hip strength in there too. Gastroc. I think I think we have a tendency to ignore the calf muscles, and I could argue that the gastroc takes as much of a hit as the quads do.
Yeah.
I feel like they recover quicker, but I mean, I've been guilty of it. You just kind of forget about them. But
Yeah.
um,
How do you test those, Laura? What are you doing in clinic to test that?
well, so I just got my handheld, my Mark 10, so I
Yeah.
haven't used it for a calf. I use a force plate instead to test them.
What's what's that setup look like?
It's ugly.
Well, tell us ugly. We're here for ugly. I mean, that's what the crowd's here for.
Gosh, I have people sit on a plyo box, and then I have it resting on my K box, and
Okay.
then yeah, and then the person's knee is about 80 degrees, and then I use a ratchet strap around the whole K box and then around their knee. So it's ugly, but it works. I keep thinking, it's on my long list of things to do for my clinic, but I need a better setup, where it's quicker. Because admittedly, if I don't have a lot of time, that's the one thing that I need to be a little intentional about having set
Yeah.
up ahead of time. But I don't, it's not great.
Well, okay. So, well, let's back up then. With testing, we're obviously what we're talking about now is some isometric inline force metrics that you're taking. Are you equating this into torque measures by measuring the lever, or are you just taking this at a force value, or what are you doing?
For which one?
Any of
For
them?
quads.
Yeah.
Um, so I have an isokinetic machine that I'll do quads and hamstrings on, but like say for example, the biggest reason why I bought a handheld was because I didn't like the hip setup for my Cybex,
Yeah.
and it just was too much of a hassle to get people strapped down correctly and be you know, more systematic about my setup. So I got a handheld, and yeah, I'll do supine, measure their moment arm, and then get their body weight in kilos, and then get a Newton meters per kilo measure
Okay.
for hip abduction, adduction, and then sometimes I'll do external rotation too at the hip.
Do you have some normative data for that you're comparing it against? Is it just stuff that you have and that you're looking at kind of clinic values or position values, or is it?
So the normative data, I believe, for like an eccentric test, if you were doing a break test, I think is close to 3 Newton meters per kilo.
For what?
For adduction and abduction. So I'll look at symmetry and then the ratio between the adductors and the abductors, which would be about 1 to 1, 1 to 1.2.
And you're using, right? What device are you using for that? Because you said you just got your Mark 10. So what are you using for that?
Yeah, it's super quick and easy. Yep.
How do you set up the abduction?
I just do it supine.
Okay.
And I put their hip in neutral because and then they can hang on to the bed or the plinth. You could strap them down, I suppose, but this would be kind of on the fly, like, all right, let's look at this really quick. And, it's not research quality, but it's, in the moment, it's quick and easy to do, as opposed to strapping them in the isokinetic machine and going through that crap. Like,
yeah. Well, one thing I've tinkered with is like some of those face cutouts. You can make it in line with abduction if you have them lie on their side and the angle is directly straight down. Obviously, you have to anchor it straight down to the floor through the hole, but that's an option to do that. I've been doing that recently with some decent results because I've done the supine version as well. I mean, do you find that they kick up into flexion a little bit when they try to like get after it?
Yeah, that is definitely an issue. You can, if you have them, if their heel is like off the end of the bench and they're close to the edge, and based on where you're having them aim, on the dynamometer, you can angle it probably a little, not angle it a little bit, but have them push right into it. I guess it just depends on how you're cueing them, but
yeah,
I think that's definitely an issue with it for sure.
So, I mean, and you said earlier, you're getting torque values for just about everything, right? As often as you can. I mean, I think that's valuable to get torque values as opposed to just reporting force metrics. But
yeah, I mean, as long as there's some normative data in the research, because sometimes it's not reported that way, or the units that you're using are different, and I hate converting stuff, so I try to just stay pretty standard, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I want to point everybody to the chat. There's also somebody posted a link over to some abduction and adduction values as well. So if you want to check that out. But Laura, back to the question at hand is, how soon are you starting this? Like after somebody post-operative ACL, and let's just, for the sake of argument, let's say it's autograft, let's say it's bone patella to bone, and they're doing well. What would be the earliest, and what values are you checking early on? Is it abduction? Is it adduction? How soon is that valuable to you versus extension, and what positions, stuff like that?
So when I was talking about hip and torque measures, I was talking about like my hip arthroscopy patients.
Oh, sure.
And PAO. For ACL, I'll just do a quad and hamstring on the isokinetic machine. So at 8 weeks, I'll do an isometric test in mid-range, like a first real test around 8 weeks. And I'll look at isometric quad and isometric hamstring.
Okay. And then you're talking about a 5-second isometric, or just and you're taking like an average of 3 trials and you take the peak, or
best of 5?
Best of 5. And you take the peak, not the average.
Yep.
Got it.
Peak force, or peak, highest.
It's giving you torque though, right? I mean, the Cybex is giving you torque because of the dynamometer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're said at 8 weeks, and that's both flexion and extension. What position you said? I know you said mid-range. We're talking like what?
60 degrees.
And what's the rationale, behind that?
It's mid-range, so they should be, the strongest at that point.
Oh, okay. And so go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just, I mean, so I mean, that seems pretty early. And I'm sure people, that aren't familiar with testing are gonna be like, wow, that's really aggressive and early. You're talking about a maximal volitional contraction, an isometric contraction, which if everybody can kind of wield back to our force velocity curve, we're talking big forces, right? This is it. And you're
If,
cool with that.
yeah, I mean, if they, you have to remember they have an inhibited quad, right? So the question is how much are they really kicking out? If if I was worried about it, I might put them in 90, but I generally do 60 on there. And that'll really, I've had people push out like as little as like, for some of the quad tendon ACLs, 20 pounds, 25 pounds, just some, it just like really varies. I guess I'm reckless. Is that what you're saying?
Dangerous or yeah, somewhat of a renegade. You are.
I I wouldn't do an actual isokinetic test until later. I just want to
Yeah.
see what their comfort level is. Obviously, if there's pain, it's not going to be a great accurate measure, but it might give me some information about tolerance.
Yeah. So do you? I mean, after that test, do you use that as a training device?
Oh, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're on it the first week post-op.
Doing what? I mean, like just doing some kind of feel out isometrics. I mean, what are the parameters around that? Do you give them some barriers or turn them loose or what?
Well, so it'll depend on range of motion. If they don't have, at least 60 degrees, I'm not going to stick them on there. We might do something different, but generally speaking, it'll be either a 90 degree or 60 degree isometric, and we're just doing like 5 second isometrics held by or followed by 8-second rest or 10-second rest, just
Okay.
kind of on and off and on and off. I basically want to tire them out.
Yeah. So you push them to fatigue,
Hmm.
and I mean, how do you? What's the progression of that? Are you adding sets reps? Are you adding time under? I mean, what's your? Do you have a set protocol, or do you kind of just go off a feel from the client, or?
I want them to feel fatigue. So for most people that early in the first week, they're done. They're done after, 2 sets. The programs are kind of already set in there. And so um, that can make it hard to make them different in the moment. But
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, it's around 4 sets, with five
Yeah.
seconds on, 8 seconds off. Yeah.
And you're doing this on your Cybex machine, right? On the isokinetic device. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could do this with your Mark 10.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I haven't used it in an inline setup or, against a wall or whatever, however you want to use it.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
I have the big machine, so I use the moneymaker.
well, I mean, and that gets into the question, right? So we are talking about in the beginning of what equipment is needed, what should you buy? I mean, like the Mark 10 it's such a great unit. I mean, to reiterate what you said earlier, I absolutely love my devices. And I, at a different time, it's probably worth talking about other devices, but for the sake of today, I mean, like you said, you could use your Mark 10 to get like some inline flexion and extension metrics. What do you see a huge value in having that isokinetic so that you can get isokinetic data later on, or is the isometric torque profile, is that enough for most of us? I mean, I guess talk me through what's the rationale. How do you rationalize a $30,000-$40,000 piece of equipment in your clinic?
I actually really like it for eccentric training. So I mean, you can't do that with an inline setup. I mean, you're only looking at isometrics, and I feel like we move past that pretty fast. You do the isometrics in the beginning, and then you move on from that. So I like the eccentric component to it. And some of the other settings in there, you can do like there's some interactive programs where you're working on
Mm-hmm.
control. So like you're in a little roadway and you're basically playing a video game with your leg if you're wanting, more of a proprioceptive type program. But
Yeah.
it does more than just testing. It's really useful. It would be really hard to imagine not having one now.
Yeah. I mean, and you're just primarily using it for your knees, or are you using it for shoulders, internal, external flexion extension stuff, or calves as well?
So there is an ankle setup and I don't like it. Uh, it's, yeah, I don't prefer that. So shoulders and knees mostly. I don't actually see a ton of shoulders.
Right. So it sounds like mostly knees then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I mean, how early with that eccentric program? Because I've actually used that eccentric on the Cybex, Bidex, Humac Norm, whatever device isokinetic that you have. And if anybody here has ever done that before, you better get yourself ready for what's coming. I mean, it can get pretty rough. So how early do you start that?
Oh, that's a good question. It's variable. For a while, I wasn't starting it until 12 weeks. I'm not
Okay.
really sure. I don't really sure what my thinking was behind that, but if they're doing well, they are, you know, not challenged anymore by whatever else we're doing, then maybe 8 weeks.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
on it, your resistance you're applying is accommodating, right? So you can back off, you can push into it hard, you can, and early on you're looking more for control than kicking out like as hard as you can. So you want a nice smooth curve. So I have a bunch of little programs on there that are driven by speed. So you start out really slow, and each set is like 5 degrees quicker, and then they progress as long as they can show um, symmetric repetitions every time. Like they have good control, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
over and over again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're actually visually looking at the quality of the curve.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And, and not to spoil the surprise, but two speakers from now, we have another individual, Dan Cobian, who's going to be talking about what is something. I mean, again, it's at a smaller level, more sensitive level, but how consistent your force production is as a metric of, again, kind of return to prior injury level or something to that effect.
That's
Not just the ability to make max force, but like to your point, if this curve is all across the map, but your peak force gets to a point, that clearly is not the same thing.
right. Yeah.
So,
So
so back to the question. I mean, you love your isokinetic device. It's very apparent that you use it all the time.
it's
Do
in
you
my
think
well.
most most clinicians can get away with not having that, or is that a need to know, or a need to have? I'm sorry, or a nice to have, in your opinion? If ACLs are your world.
I think if that's going to be your specialty, you probably should, right? Because, if you're the only person in town with it, theoretically, you can test other people's patients. It would be kind of a marketing device too, if you want to look at it like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I know it's not realistic either. It's it's a 30, $40,000 machine. Can you replicate the same things on it elsewhere? Probably. I didn't have one 2 years ago, and that was,
Yeah.
18 years as a PT without one. Only had it for 2 years, and as far as I know, I didn't kill anybody or like,
Or if you did, they didn't come back and tell you about it.
yeah, I mean, there's a thing too. You have to say, oh yeah, none of my ACLs retore. Yeah, because they wouldn't come back to you, right?
I mean, that's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Does anybody really know? Um, but I would, I cut corners in other areas so I could have one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Jason brings up a good point too in the chat. Is like, are PTs more likely to send their patients back to sport without isokinetic testing or refer to another PT for it? I mean, if you are the only show in town, do you think we as a profession have gotten to the point that we are accepting enough that this is a valuable piece of equipment, or you think we're still fighting that battle?
I mean, the repair rates, they're still crappy. You know,
Yeah.
what are we missing? Are we just not measuring things? You know, and it's not just strength. I mean, we can get into other stuff later, but it's, you know, the statistics aren't great. So I think people don't have enough data to make good decisions. You know, they might just be
Mm-hmm.
doing an eyeball test or a hop test. I could argue that that's not enough. And I think if I knew of somebody in my community that had one, I would certainly use them. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. I'm getting most of my testing from the surgeons that know that I have one.
Yeah. So now, I mean, now you've opened up a question in a box that we're going to have to go down now, which is hop testing. And so is hop testing, I mean, is that something that you do regularly? Could that, will it ever take the place of isokinetic testing, vice versa? Should we do both? Should we do one versus, I mean, what's your thought on where we are currently with that? Do you do it?
If you're talking about, you know, the single hop for distance, triple hop,
Mm-hmm.
crossover, hop, no, I stopped doing that a long time ago. Um, it, I think, I think if you do that early on and you see the same like when somebody's nearing symmetry, it's not going to be a sensitive enough test. And the
Yeah.
thing is like what it's intended to measure is your distance hopped. It doesn't care how you got there, doesn't care how ugly it looks. And then more importantly, you know, even if the person looks symmetric, the kinetics we know from the study I sent you are not favorable compared to the contralateral side. So I think it could give you I think it, yeah, I don't like them.
Yeah. Okay. No, no. I mean, again, so what
Not
takes
really
that
sure,
place?
but you know, unless you're wanting to know a horizontal, you know, how far somebody can horizontally hop, then use that. But I don't think you can use that in place of just a basic strength test.
And by basic strength test, you mean?
You're not testing their strength with a hop test, you're testing how far they've hopped, period. I
And,
think
and
assumptions are made from symmetric hopping.
so, I mean, there's so many questions with that. Like, is it all hop testing? Is it just certain aspects of hop testing? Do you do any hop testing at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm when you say hop testing, I always think of, you know, the
No,
four.
no, no. I think most of us would probably think that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I will do like a single leg vertical and I will do a counter movement jump. These are on force plates. And then
Yep.
I'll do a drop jump to vertical
Drop down to, okay. And what's the point for the drop jump to vertical?
to get a RSI measure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that may be new for some people. RSI. Walk us through that a little bit. What is that specific? Why do you care about it? What is it?
It's so when I think about return to sports, I think about checking all these boxes off, right? So I pick something that would be meaningful for torque production. So quad function torque production, that's my isokinetic machine. I pick something that's measuring power. So like, uh, you know, counter movement jump on force
Mm-hmm.
plates. I pick something for the ability to transition from deceleration to acceleration or eccentric to concentric. That would be a single leg drop jump to vertical. I would want to know symmetry in their power production with a vertical test. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the problem is I think there's not one thing that's going to give you all the information.
Right. Right. So
And
where does RSI fit into that?
um, that that would be kind of the change of direction type measure. Like
Okay.
they would need to be able to transition in and out of like a change of direction quickly. So that's looking at your flight time and your ground contact time, like depending on how you're calculating it and
Mhm.
what you have to calculate it.
Yeah, I think
you can look at like your RSI modified from a counter movement jump, and then, or you can look at an RSI or a RSR from a drop jump.
right. And so what does that stand for?
Reactive
For
strength index,
yeah,
and then there's reactive strength ratio.
right. And so it is the
The
ratio.
more I read about it, like the more confused I get.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, right. We're talking about how quickly in that stretch shortening cycle, how efficient you are about producing force, spending less time on the ground, but still maximizing the force and the time that you spend on the ground. And so for your case, is like you're looking for what two metrics? You're looking for minimal ground contact time, but also, I mean, highest displacement, right? Or largest displacement, I guess is the term there.
Yeah, probably more leaning more on the ground contact time. Like, can they get in and out of it? Because when you watch somebody, especially like since we were talking about this just yesterday, if you're watching somebody do like a triple jump or triple hop test, and they just look sluggish,
Yeah.
and they can achieve the distance, but they just look like there's more effort needed there. They don't have that bounce or that, athleticism. So how do you measure that? What's a good metric? What are we
Yeah.
looking at?
So how do you standardize it? What's the box height? I mean, is that typical for you and what you're doing? Is it
It's 12
specific?
inches. So
Okay.
like we were talking about yesterday, there you can do different box heights if you want to, but I just do, for purposes of time, I just take a 12-inch box and have them hop down and then straight up into a vertical.
What's the cueing for that? Or you just tell them, because again, I've struggled with this in the past. Like, do I tell them, hey, I want you to hit the ground and jump as high as you can, or I want you to spend the least amount of time on the ground?
Yep.
Obviously, does that change things?
Yeah. Oh, no,
I
it
love
totally does. Like yesterday when we were talking about intent, I think that's everything. You need to ask what you're looking for, because they might take their time, hop down and then straight up. What are you looking for? Are you looking for um, are you more curious about the height when they're, going back into a jump, or are you more curious about how quickly they can get back off the ground and straight up? So if you're looking for the speed component, you would say, um, you know, oh gosh, sometimes I use hot lava, but like
it.
I want you to jump down and straight up as fast as you can.
So
Or you could say
do
jump
you
straight down and then straight up as fast and as high as you can. Because I
right?
think I think that matters, right?
Yeah. I mean, do they ask you like, should I bend my knees? Do I want to bend my knees? I mean,
I I have a problem of overcomplicating things, I think, and I have really made a concerted effort to make things really simple. Like, I don't know, like if you're doing an isometric mid-thigh pull, like step onto the plates, grab the bar, and on the count of three, pull.
well,
Yeah.
so I mean, again, the argument could be made. Well, what if there's inconsistency in how you set? I mean,
Oh, there's always that. Yeah.
yeah. Do you just kind of chalk that up as just noise, like this noise in the machine, or is that undermining the quality of the data? Or again, is there too pedantic versus a little bit too liberal? I mean, where does that line fall for you? It sounds like hot lava is where it falls.
It works, right? You have a high school kid. Okay, this is hot lava. um, yeah, I think it's really important, but honestly, I'm not great at being super consistent with my cueing, because I have different aged people and
Yeah.
people that are like really experienced, that they know what I'm asking because we've maybe done it in the clinic. I mean, most likely we've done it. We've done a drop jump to
Right.
vertical multiple times. But yeah, I think, I'm with, yeah, I try the best I can to be consistent. It's not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but I think between sessions, you know, if I'm getting what I want, then yeah.
You're doing one single
I'm
jump for
doing
this, right? Like
it.
you're doing one single jump. Like they're on a 12-inch box, they jump down, hop up, and then land, and then the test is over.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then do you care about how they land? Is that a concern for you? So that second landing, not the one, I mean, I think it would be, you know, are you video capturing this and looking at their kinematics when they land at all, at any time, just the first jump, just
Yeah, so I used to do a drop to vertical before I had force plates, like, you know, before I had a lot of things. And I would videotape it from the sagittal view and the frontal view and
mm-hmm.
kind of get an idea. And this spun off of the LESS because I didn't feel like I was getting enough information with the LESS because it's double leg. I wanted to look at side to side differences. And then it was literally like the same pattern I saw every time I tested it: stiff knee, um, you know, not landing in enough flexion. If they're landing well, they're less likely to go into valgus, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I think quality definitely matters, but for the purpose of, you know, an RSI measure, and like after they go vertical, they have to land on the plate. Like if they land on the edge
right.
of the plate and it like tips over, that's not a good landing. That's not going to record well. So I guess to answer your question, maybe both. Uh, because I've worked with them, we've done it multiple times in the clinic. I feel like that's not really an issue because I'm not sure I would choose that test if we had been doing it in the clinic and they look like crap,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Okay.
But I also think that when people have a good return of torque production, all of this stuff is much easier.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
So this
Okay.
is stuff that I'm doing like, you know, towards the end,
Yeah, in phase stuff. Well,
when they're at
what
least
what
80% symmetric.
yeah. So what I want to do is we're going to go into some breakout rooms, but after the breakout rooms, when we come back, we're going to talk through kind of those different phases. As in, you said we look at force early on, and then you move into, you kind of named out some of those. And again, it's very similar to Vermeil's hierarchy, right? We're kind of
Totally.
narrowing our focus into,
That's all
it's
it is.
exactly right. It's all the same thing, right? So in doing so, I want to talk through like what test do you use for each one of those things, but Shannon, in the chat window, I'm going to steal your question and we're going to pump this out to our breakout groups. So Laura, you, Scott, stay here. Jason, you stay here as well. And then we'll make sure everybody's got a group. We got enough people in each group. But the question, and I'm going to repost this, everybody. Shannon, I really appreciate it. It's a good question. So if we dissect, first of all, can we dissect the metrics from a counter movement jump or from a drop jump? And you know, such as what is optimal ground contact time, and how do you use this? How do you use your output, Laura, and the group to determine what your intervention should be? Right, as in somebody jumps down, has a large ground contact time, but has a very high vertical, or the opposite, has a low vertical but has a very short ground contact time. How would you intervene in that individual? What would that look like? And so that's what I want to drive into the breakout rooms. So let me start that process and we'll kick you guys into those breakouts. Awesome. Shannon, I'm so sorry you got cut off. You were in the zone too.
Yeah, it's all good. I wanted to let everyone go.
But no. Well, Shannon, I mean, if you would you, if you feel comfortable kind of saying what you were speaking to, I think it's valuable for the group.
Yeah, so I don't have force plates, unfortunately, at the clinic that I'm at right now, but I use the MyJump app. And so I've been using RSI, like doing some single leg drop jumps, and it's newer for me to start incorporating. And I'm getting all this data and I'm able to compare like side to side and all of these things. And it's giving me an idea essentially of what I need to build more into my programming in terms of its like, you know, power, deceleration, like eccentric, like those kind of things. But in terms of being able to like take those numbers, for instance, if like ground contact time is like 400 milliseconds or whatever, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to that person? Because I don't have baseline data on them. And then like, basically like, I mean, I have like an idea, right? But in terms of like what's gonna make for that person, what's an appreciable change over what amount of time? What would I expect them to get to? Do I, if they're a high performance athlete, they should be hitting a lot quicker than that. Basically, like, I'm getting this data, cool. Now what do I do with it? What do I expect from it? What do I want? What kind of like marks am I looking to hit down the road?
Yeah, really good questions, and I don't have the answer for them.
I have some.
Yeah, I'm sure Scott does. I know I'll let him speak because I'm certainly no expert in the force plates. I'm pretty new to using them. I think as far as programming, I would put more value while you're rehabbing to look for changes between testing sessions. So month to month or whatever you're testing. And then maybe when you get closer to the end, and you're breaking down your counter movement jump, because there are some normative data for like a modified RSI that you can look up and kind of see, if you have a Division I baseball player or whatever, you can compare them to them and see where they're at. But I think for most people, for me, it's, a symmetry thing. And then am I getting changes in these numbers over time? Yeah. And then at the end result, what does it all mean? Like, I think the more data sometimes that I have, the more confused I get. And it's like freaking overload. And you have to step back and say, okay, what am I really looking at? What matters? What can I change in the clinic? Is my cueing crappy? It gets really, really complicated, I guess.
What variable are you more concerned with, Laura? Jump height or ground contact time?
So both, I guess. You like that's I think they're different. I don't think I can say one is better than the other. For instance, so I see a lot of skiers, right? In a counter movement jump, what we typically see in some of the research is they will offload eccentrically and offload concentrically. So if you're measuring impulse or something like that, you'll see a difference side to side if you're looking at asymmetry. So for me, we were talking about this in the breakout group, the vertical jump height is my measure of power. Yep. But then I want to see is that coming from both legs? Are we still asymmetric? Because those things to me are important. Are we shielding the side and still protecting it? What's going on there? So that would probably be more important for me as far as the symmetry goes. And at what point is this unacceptable? Like, are we talking, 10% difference? What matters? So I mean, I think we all try to shoot for symmetry, but I mean, I haven't read enough papers on this for many reasons, but those would be the two things I look at. And then, with the RSI, because there are measures that you can compare to, especially with NCAA Division I, you can just kind of look at them and compare.
Yeah.
Because it's different sport to sport too.
Well, it brings up a really interesting problem that we didn't discuss, and we're not going to spend too much time because this is a rabbit hole, but you jump off a box, you land on obviously individual force plates, right leg on one plate, left leg on one plate. You land and then you're looking for RSI. So you cue them hot lava and that works beautifully. So they hit the ground, get off the ground, and you're like, wow, your involved limb spent less time on the ground and you jumped really high. I'm like, wow, that looks great. But then you go back and look at the force data, the impulse data, and it's nowhere close. So they just didn't use that leg. It hit the ground, but it didn't do anything to help the jump. And so it brings up an interesting point where RSI may fall short.
Okay. Yeah. And so I like single leg stuff, but I also like double leg counter movement jumps because if they have the ability to use their non-affected side, are they going to use it more? You know, like are is that going to be their compensation even though they might like look symmetric in a drop jump or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's always I think there was one study on soccer that recently came out looking at eccentric deceleration and asymmetries.
Yeah.
I think I know there has been for ski racers, but that's the main reason that I might look at a counter movement jump. That and just jump height because that's used as a measure of power, and
Right.
strength and conditioning. But
So
just
it all matters, is what you're telling us.
yeah, I mean, I guess it matters what you're looking for and what you want to manipulate in your treatment. But
Yeah.
it's a huge rabbit hole, and I think the more I read about it, the more confused I get.
Yeah, well, I mean, this gets down to the definition and semantics of these terms and definitions, and you have to understand this stuff to be able to use it. And so, I mean, I think that creates a difficulty there. But before we get too far, I mean, I know we're right at an hour now, and I know I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I know you got to leave shortly too. Does anybody have any questions? This has been awesome, Laura. Like seriously, it's such a good topic area that clearly we can spiral a bit, and so. We really appreciate it, but I do want to open it up for maybe one or two questions if anybody has anything. It looks like there's some in the chat. So one of the questions from Niles is, are you doing single leg drop jump or bilateral with 2 force plates?
I have 2 force plates, so I'm doing a single leg drop jump for each leg, and then a counter movement jump would be 1 foot on each force plate and doing a double leg counter movement jump. Those are kind of the two I'm most familiar with.
Yeah. And then Kendall asks, are you, sorry, just refreshed. Have you ever had symmetrical single leg vertical jump with asymmetry of ground contact time?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And what would that mean to you if that did happen? How would you interpret that?
For decreased ground contact time on one side?
So the question is you had symmetrical single leg vertical jump height, but asymmetric ground contact time. So the ratio is different, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably address more of the strength shortening cycle with that person. Like,
yeah.
Is it they're just not explosive enough on that side, or is it? Yeah, that's a tough question. That's the stuff that, I think the more you measure stuff, you either get more confused or you start seeing patterns. Because, like, I think you would have to look at a ton of athletes and start noticing patterns, kind of like I did with hop tests over the years. It's like I see the same thing every time I do it. It's pretty predictable. And I can't say I've done this enough to really notice any specific patterns other than, especially with the counter movement jump, that leaning away.
Yeah.
And the asymmetry and jump height on single leg. I see a lot of basketball players too, and that's typical to have a difference in vertical jump height, one leg or the other, because they're just so dominant on one leg. Whether that's a good thing or not, meh.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to bring us to a close. Laura, you are a rock star. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We had an awesome turnout tonight, and I hope this kind of stirred the pot a little bit and get your brain working for some ideas, some questions, some thoughts. I know we had a great discussion in our group about RSI and what that means. And again, as always, please reach out to Shelby. She's kind of our liaison for these casual chats. If you have questions, if you want to get in contact with Laura, you have thoughts, please reach out. And we're going to keep doing these. We've had some awesome responses. And as always, we just want to thank our guest, Laura, for coming out and doing this for us. So Laura, you're the best.